So planning is not a popularity contest. It's not a referendum. It's a policy-driven process. It's the more contentious applications, those larger applications, that make it up to committee. And I think people can sometimes struggle to understand why, even if they've spoken to their councillor and the council understands their concerns, the council would have to take a step back and approve an unpopular application nonetheless. But I think it's still really important that decisions are made by people, and our decisions are made in a way where people can see how the decision-making process has evolved and how they've got to that stage.
Hello and welcome back to the Hypercube Podcast. I am joined in person today by James Jamieson, who is Vice President of Business Development Planning for Starlight Energy. James, great to have you here. Great to see you in Glasgow. If you wouldn't mind, could you introduce yourself and your role at Starlight for the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. So like you said, I've got a rather kind of grandiose sounding title of Vice President Business Development, but I'm essentially a town planner. I sometimes, when folk ask me what I do for a living, I say I'm a planner by trade. I've started saying I'm a lapsed town planner because it's a long time since I did any urban planning or town planning. I've been working in the energy sector for about 15 years now. But yeah, essentially I lead the planning environmental team for Starlight Energy in our Glasgow office. Starlight is part of the wider NextEnergy Group. We're the development company at the sort of start of the project process. We work alongside NextEnergy Capital, who are the asset managers, and Wise Energy, who are the kind of site managers at the tail end once sites are up and running and constructed, and they oversee construction and operation processes as well. So we're a team of 6 or 7 in Glasgow. We have a couple of colleagues in London, but yeah, we're part of the wider NextEnergy Group of about 400 people.
Amazing. One of my best friends at school growing up, his dad was a town planner, and he had like this dogmatic rampage against mini roundabouts. Okay. And he had this whole thing about how that was just like terrible road planning. And so I'll get your thoughts on that a bit later. Sure. But it's a really interesting background because you've worked in local authority, you've worked in consultancy, you're now on the developer side. It's like a really good mix of perspectives and skills to bring into kind of the energy sector. How does it help shape like the work you do and the way you kind of show up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, having worked in all those 3 roles over the years, the key thing about planning is you apply for planning permission, you can't get anything done without the planning authority, and you typically have consultants working alongside you as part of your project team as well. So having worked in all those roles myself, it means it's a lot easier to get yourself into the kind of mind frame of the person on the other side of the table or the other team members. Planning is a very collaborative profession. It's a contact sport, getting in touch with people and making decisions in person is a lot easier than remotely or by email. So that the nature of the job is that you know hopefully quite a lot, but sometimes just a little bit about a lot of different things. So being able to kind of understand exactly where those different stakeholders and decision makers and advisors are coming from, it helps you give better advice, helps you get better results. And I always think about trying to maximize the benefits for projects and minimize the impacts on local communities or receptors or whatever the issues might be associated with each project. So yeah, having worked across the spectrum of those sort of main 3 roles gives you an insight into how decisions are arrived at, both from the kind of decision making point of view, but from an advisory point of view as well.
One of the previous guests talked about how there are no vanilla energy projects left in the UK, and I imagine it must be so easy to bump into a piece of legislation or a flavour of stakeholder that you've just never ever seen before, that's deeply complicated and lots of people care about with their whole soul. Is that the case in the kind of projects you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think by personality, I like doing new things and trying new experiences. Planning is a very varied profession. You get involved in all sorts of different things. You can be sort of wrestling with some sort of thorny legal issue one day or one morning, and then by the afternoon you're reviewing an ecology report or out on site doing some photography work or speaking to a member of the public. So despite the fact I've been doing, or focusing on solar projects for the last 12, 13 years, there is still a huge amount of variety in the job, and each project is different. Working with a local community, um, who are supportive or pretty relaxed about a scheme, is obviously a great thing. You can then go 2 miles down the road and you have a very different experience. So the every project is slightly different. The issues are always slightly different, and getting to the bottom of what people or what makes people tick, be that the planning officer or some consultees or members of the public near the site, is really interesting and a good way of kind of working out what the key issues will be in each site. I mean, working in infrastructure is interesting because you travel around, even internationally. A road is a road. You might drive in one side or the other. You can instantly pick out a pylon, or some overhead lines. But other sectors, housing, for example, you could just about work out where you are in the world from the style of architecture or the style of housing that you see in a photo, or if you're abroad. So whilst infrastructure is infrastructure wherever you go, it's the kind of people behind that, the decision making behind that vary, and getting to know those and developing your soft skills to be able to work across borders and with different groups and different stakeholders is a really rewarding part of the job.
That always surprises me because at Starlight, you've grown across multiple countries, developing all over the place. It always surprises me that you are able to manage that complexity and going into different legal system, like different local government structures, everything. How, like, to me, that sounds incredibly difficult and like managing a lot of chaos. Like, how does that play out in reality?
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky in that we're part of a larger group that has, we all got together in the autumn for a sort of get together, or Nextival. And I can't remember the precise number, but I think there are over 100 nationalities in the group. So we're a global operation. We benefit from uh, all those different nationalities, people that understand the way of working in different countries. Some parts of the job travel well across borders. Some of the technical support, for example, we do some design work and some photomontage work for different parts of the world and projects in Canada, for example. The planning side of things, whilst a lot of the soft skills, negotiation, persuasion, project management, travel well across boundaries, and you can help out your colleagues. You have to have that local knowledge of the law or the regulations, and like a lot of international businesses, will try and work with local suppliers and local stakeholders to ensure that whilst we're bringing our sort of global brand and global presence, we respect the kind of local issues by working with stakeholders and advisors and suppliers who are really well embedded into the local supply chains and business landscape.
Yeah, and I wanted to go on to asking about the wider NextEnergy Group because it sounds like it's giving you that global distribution, that kind of global locality. But am I right in thinking it actually, like the platform that it brings with it, gives you kind of a lot of additional benefits in the way you're doing work?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the DNA that runs through the group is, it really sort of beds in the approach that Starlight takes at the start of the project. So, for example, we as a group have a nature strategy, which is, a commitment to improving the biodiversity on and around our sites across our, extensive portfolio, and that we have to commit to that, and at a very early stage of developing a project. So when we look at the land, we work out how much land we need, what kind of land, its location, grid connection. But whereas maybe 5 years ago or so, the idea of enhancing biodiversity on and around a development site was a bit of an afterthought. Now it's really incorporated in from the start. And that just reflects the approach that NextEnergy Group is taking as a whole, and the sector takes as a whole, and the importance of the biodiversity recovery alongside tackling climate change by decarbonising the energy sector. We're also working on a social strategy as a group, which Starlight staff have had some really important input into, because we are speaking to local communities. We're running community engagement events where we're dealing with on the ground problems that affect local communities. So we've been able to give some advice on sort of boots on the ground advice about how the best way to open up a conversation in a difficult situation is, or reassure people and local communities, the impacts maybe aren't as high as they originally anticipated. And like I was saying, the idea of minimizing impacts and maximizing benefits, you're always able to do that a bit better if you have built up a kind of close relationship with those local stakeholders through ground level political organisations like parish councils or community councils, or through individuals who come along to your consultation events, and you try and get to know them and speak to them as a fellow human being rather than just someone coming along and representing a corporation. And I think part of the reason I enjoy working for a developer rather than a consultant or an arm's length representative is that it's my name in the application form, and my phone number's there, my email address is there. I always say to members of the public, if you have any problems, by all means get in touch. Let us know. And I'm sure we'll come on to this, but some of the part of the problem maybe with the use of AI by objectors, to generate lots of objections, sometimes on kind of spurious grounds, is that sometimes people with legitimate concerns or legitimate issues that we could probably address pretty robustly. Solar farms have quite a sort of straightforward design process, and they're quite flexible in some ways. If someone has a specific concern about an impact on a view, or a tree consultant says you need to move the panels further back from a tree, we can accommodate that quite easily. But it's difficult to get to that grainy level of site-specific and location-specific detail if you're being ground in objections relating to kind of non-issues. There's this perception that the more objections you submit, the more likely an application is to be refused, which isn't really the case. You're just being blunt, you're kind of wasting the officer's time, because that officer who has to report on all those issues would be better spending his or her time reviewing the really kind of thorny issues and negotiating with the applicant to try and resolve those issues, rather than just wading through tens, hundreds of objections on what can be kind of spurious grounds at times.
Oh, amazing. You've touched on AI, my favourite subject. There was a lot in there. I want to just shout out to Biodiversity Net Gain being a big export of Scotland. I think we were the first to do it in Scotland before England, and so on and so forth. It's amazing to hear that at Starlight you're actually taking that a step further and going global with it, which is that's amazing, like really cool.
Yeah, I think the tagline is 30 by 30. We're keen to enhance the kind of biodiversity value of our portfolio by 30% by 2030.
Right, cool.
In England,
30%.
Yeah,
big.
Yeah, it's a big uplift. I mean, in England, there's a statutory requirement now for an uplift of 10%, and that has to be managed for 30 years. And the wider development construction industry is kind of really wrestling with how they incorporate that into sites. And the current government is really keen to get houses built and new infrastructure built, energy infrastructure, data centers. How do we balance that push for development against having high levels of biodiversity on and around sites? Is that's the crux of what it's like to be for a planner. You're balancing the development against the impacts. And the interesting thing about the biodiversity net gain side of things in England is that the target's 10%, manage it for 30 years. We always exceed that on solar sites. It's easier on solar sites than some other forms of development, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, we're proud of exceeding that statutory target, knocking it out of the park most of the time. And then we typically apply for planning consent for 40 years of operation. So we're also able to say to local communities and local authorities, you want 30 and the law says 30, we're going to do this for 40 and leave a kind of lasting legacy on the biodiversity side of things.
That's amazing. It's something that I'm glad it's kind of begrudgingly be picked up, but it's starting to gain momentum elsewhere as well. And to see someone like Starlight really drive forward is incredible. I think like energy's so like that. It's such a lovely industry for it. Not like optimizing sort of ads or like retail carts in an online shop. It's like there's a physical thing, there's the environment, there's people's lives that you're touching, and like you are leaving a lasting impact on the world. And I think being forward thinking and trying to bring it all together is challenging but quite noble. And I guess like you end up, it must be hard to make the judgment calls, because like evil corporate mega overlord like says optimize profit, right? And who cares, like pave everything, let's go.
Yeah.
But so there is a cost function. That's easy because it's all in pound coins, right? But where do you make the judgment calls on like the social part, or do you just have to lead from like your core principles?
It's a balance. it will never be fully, totally optimized from a commercial perspective. There are always impacts that have to be mitigated. From a design point of view, because we've been doing this for a while, and we've built up the experience, we can quickly look at land opportunities and realize, this looks good, or there's definitely going to be an issue with using that field over there, or we're going to have problems, with this view, or there's some heritage assets that we need to take into consideration. So by its very nature, the planning system is, it's an interventory process. It's slightly curtailing the kind of those commercial forces, and whilst we can find that frustrating at times, obviously, and whilst we don't always agree with the views that are put to us by authorities or third-party stakeholders, you can take a step back and go, well, I'm glad I live in a country where we have a robust planning system, and there's the opportunity for everybody to comment on applications and get involved. So, those judgment calls, I think, probably have the light kind of shone on the most brightly when the authority gets to the decision-making stage. Most of our projects, by their nature, because they're large scale, end up in front of a planning committee. So the planning officer will review the application and work with us, and negotiate and try and mitigate the impacts as best possible, and weigh up the pros and cons of the application, make a recommendation to the committee, and we then enter the joyful world of local politics. So we present the application, objectors will get the opportunity to put their thoughts forward to local politicians, and it's not a job I would envy, they have to decide, whether to approve or refuse the application. And that's when those judgment calls, I think, become trickiest for us to kind of predict and manage and to work around, and difficult for the decision makers as well. They are quite often councils are under a lot of pressure from locals who might not be a massive fan of the project, but at the same time, they maybe recognise the need to decarbonise the grid in their area, or they do hopefully recognise some of the biodiversity benefits. So planning is not a popularity contest. It's not a referendum. It's a policy-driven process. So those tensions between local politics and the kind of policy framework are probably the kind of toughest issues to navigate for decision makers and for applicants and advisors. And then there's the wider kind of issue of who makes the decisions. Should it be made by the planning officer? The vast majority of planning applications are made by planning officers. House extensions, straightforward applications, they don't all go up to planning committee. That'd be crazy. It's the more contentious applications, those larger applications, that make it up to committee. And I think people can sometimes struggle to understand why, even if they've spoken to the councillor and the council understands their concerns, the council would have to take a step back and approve an unpopular application nonetheless. But I think it's still really important that decisions are made by people, and our decisions are made in a way where people can see how the decision making process has evolved and how they've got to that stage. In an ideal world, I'd love to see a quicker planning system, of course. Most people would, but there's also a balance to strike between a swift-moving process and a process that isn't so swift that people think it's a fait accompli and that their views haven't been taken into consideration.
I always say about technology and building solutions that actually the tech's the easy bit. It's all the humans that make it really hard. Like, if you could just tell me what you actually want and not what you say you want, and like I can understand the politics and make everyone agree and work together, I'll find you all the technology people who will make the tech happen. But that first bit's actually really quite difficult to do. I'm interested because you've done planning for a while, and you're talking about judgment calls, some of the hard stuff, and we've mentioned AI. Like, how are you seeing planning as a process change over your career?
Yeah, so when I started working in local authority, it was probably at this sort of, the planning was starting to be digitized at that point. The vast majority of applications that were being submitted were, they would all go online, but, this is around about sort of 2007. So applications were still being printed out, 4 times and submitted in hard copy and all that sort of stuff. That sort of administrative process has now essentially fully digitized. It's never been easier for able to comment on applications and obviously gain information on schemes by going online. But you still do get the occasional handwritten objection note when you're going through some of the comments on your application. And I'm always quite pleased to see that. Probably, an older person that's, keen to get their point across. And I always think, if you can't be bothered to type it out properly or write it out, are you invested in the point that you're trying to make as much as you really think? You can make it too easy. But one of the founding or the kind of key components of the planning system in this country is community engagement and the right for everybody to have their say. And of course, that should be facilitated in a kind of streamlined way. But yeah, the process, broadly speaking, or as long as I've been doing it, is essentially the same. But obviously, with digitisation, the access to information is easier. It's easier to find information online about schemes. It's easier to object. We still don't seem to have mobilised the silent majority or the kind of supporters of schemes. That would probably result in more kind of balanced decision making or more balanced understanding. It's very easy to look at an application with 20 objections and no support letters and think, oh, this must be terrible. But in reality, there's probably plenty of support of people that aren't especially fussed about the application that just haven't commented.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what about like going forward in the future? Where do you think there is opportunity for technology and AI to really support versus like what are the core bits that must be led?
Yeah, I suppose we touched on this earlier when we were talking about, people want to see who's making the decision. And I was thinking about this as I was sort of weighing up some thoughts for this podcast. And, it's interesting when you get your decision notice as a planner, it still has someone's name at the bottom. It's not, Glasgow City Council. It will have, the planning manager or the head of planning's name on that. I think, the decision-making process still needs to be human-led. I think there are a lot of opportunities for AI and the kind of ongoing digitisation process to lift some of the administrative burden. Planning, is very document heavy, and you have a combination of written reports as well as plans and drawings and all sorts of other stuff, spreadsheets that are submitted. So, we have, as a business, we have however many documents that we have to manage, and we're looking at ways of managing that more efficiently across the group. It would be interesting to see if, as a profession, like some other professions have done, if we could agree a sort of way of working from start to finish that sort of transcends, the applicant into the local authority back to the applicant, because we spend quite a lot of time reorganizing our data, reorganizing our documents. It would be good if there was a smoother way of doing that. And like I said, planning is a collaborative profession, and I think since I've been doing it, there's less of an us and them sort of relationship between authorities and applicants. Far more people work in the private sector now compared to even when I qualified. I think when I graduated, I was the only person that went to work for a consultancy. Everyone else went into local authority. I think then it was seen, you would do a few years in a local authority and then go and work in consultancy. That's less of a kind of career trajectory now. So I think that planners, I think, are maybe a bit cautious at times, maybe a bit risk adverse, dare I say. Some of us are a bit slow moving, or there's a perception, even from colleagues and stuff that, we could do with an answer on this and you're still mulling it over, weighing it up. Maybe we're well placed to try and work out where that sweet spot, that balance is between leveraging AI and digitisation to take some of the admin burden off officers and other stakeholders in the planning process, and freeing up more kind of headspace and resource for wrestling with the really thorny issues and the negotiations and the discussions around those key issues.
I think it's a really exciting space because we're just on the cusp of all this technology being quite well suited and easy to deploy for these kinds of problems. We did a pilot for like a developer, and they had exactly that problem once a quarter or whatever, huge project, once a quarter. They had to sit down in the local town hall with this like 400-page printout of the project, and it's like, when is this getting delivered? When's that road getting closed? When's that getting dug up? And they're answering questions for hours at a time with the local authority. And the pilot we did was around, well, actually, you could serve the local authority ChatGPT type interface that allows them to chat to the project that's got the latest data in it, and get their answers near real time. You get to control, it's not making stuff up, you get to control what's in it. And I think the zeitgeist, like external to energy, is that everyone's getting used to just chat being the last interface. And we really see benefits in that. And the other thing I always think about is like, how intractable is it to go back over the last 15 years of applications that were approved or denied and do a deep analysis on like the themes? Because up until 3 years ago, computers just couldn't do it. It's poorly structured, it's emails, it's spreadsheets. We're now at the point where actually that's achievable. We can do that.
Yeah, I mean, these are some of the discussions we have. You know, we spend, like I say, we spend quite a lot of time reorganizing our data, even internally, as it transfers from, you know, us to the funding side of things through to construction and backwards and forwards of queries, come backwards and forwards. You know, the ability to kind of standardize that and to rake through it quickly and pull out information would be powerful. You know, we use Copilot embedded into our Microsoft products, or some of us do. And that can be helpful for, you know, quickly picking out, you know, when did I mention the flood risk assessment's impact on whatever it might be, rather than totally relying on your memory. At the same time, there's a balance to strike, because you have to know your project well enough to be grilled at planning committee or by stakeholders in a town hall. They don't want to see you whipping out your phone and quickly looking up the answer or looking for the answer in your files. So, I mean, 10, 15 years of data across however many planning authorities, it feels to me like a mammoth task, but, you know, picking out those trends over time would be valuable to work out where the planning system goes over the next 10, 15 years.
And do you think so I was going to ask around, do you think communities and the public are on this adoption trend of like more technology? You've suggested that you're now getting swamped with sort of ChatGPT generated objections. We were talking to a regulator actually recently, and they said they went to consultation about a certain organization becoming an energy supplier, and they normally get like 100, 200 responses to a consultation like this, and they got tens of thousands, and they are like, almost all of them are large language model produced. And the thing about those is that they're very verbose. There's usually like, they like to just spill their guts and go on and on and on. And you just think like, you're actually, like you said earlier, like swamping the system from the real deep human thought that's gonna add value to the process, not just like crank the handle.
Yeah, I think, you know, we talk a lot in the planning sector about educating people about what planning actually means. Planning it's quite a niche profession. You know, I sort of stumbled across it. I really enjoyed geography at school, and it's long enough ago now that I wrote to a university. I wrote to Dundee University and asked them to send me a hard copy of their prospectus. I was trying to find geography in the contents and missed it by a page, and town planning was the next page, and I thought, oh, that looks really interesting. I'll do that instead. And took a year off between school and university. If I'm honest, didn't give a huge amount of thought. And I think it's panned out okay. But I asked ChatGPT last night. I'm really enjoying studying geography. What careers would you suggest? And it did suggest planning. So educating people about what planning is and the reality of it, and that most applications aren't especially contentious, and telling communities and in the nicest possible way that spamming the system with endless objections about really spurious stuff, it doesn't really help. If anything, it's going to undermine your case, because if you have a really valid point in there that the officer can phone up the applicant or speak to me about and say, got this real concern, can we solve it? And we can work together and hopefully reduce that impact or remove it completely. That's just going to get lost. And, maybe some of these objectors are also the people that think that, we're, wasting authorities' time or bringing forward projects that just because they don't like, and they're not, they're approaching it from a niche point of view, they're not sort of taking a balanced view on it. They maybe think that we are not using, public resources especially efficiently, but asking a planning officer to wade through all this stuff, it's not really helping anybody. And if anything, it's getting in the way of more robust decision making.
Yeah, I guess like there is a finite time budget no matter what. Like there is a finite time budget to these things. Oh, what are you as the public spending on?
Yeah. And planning's reporting heavy as well. Like I said, in the run up to committee, a planning officer has to write up the report, and a key element of writing that report is responding to the points that members of the public have raised, rightly so. But if there are hundreds of comments in there, and they have to wade through them, and we obviously help them as much as we can. That's when I'm chatting to other members of the team, a key thing I always come back to is our job is to make the officer's job as easy as possible. We obviously want the application to be approved, but we also want it determined in a timely manner. And if we have to appeal, we just want to know that there's an insurmountable issue or a key difference of opinions, as there often are in the profession. That's not a problem, but we want to get to that stage, reasonably swiftly. So yeah, I think letting people know and making people understand that actually spamming the system just doesn't really help anyone. That said, I would say LPAs and other regulators are cottoning onto it, and there was an interesting appeal decision a few weeks ago where an application for some houses in England or some flats, the application was refused, went to appeal, went to a public inquiry, and there was a third-party member of the public nearby who used a large language model to generate dozens and dozens of pages of response on heritage matters to the appellant's submission. And it was gobbledygook, it was nonsense. And that the inspector who was determining the appeal allowed the appeal, granted planning permission, and actually awarded costs against that member of the public. So the member of the public had to pay for the appellant's heritage consultant's time in responding to the nonsense they'd submitted. So it's quite unusual to see that public engagement in the system is cherished, and we encourage people to get involved. We don't want to be hitting them with fines and discouraging people for fear of financial punishment, but the inspector had obviously had enough in that situation.
Yeah, but do you know what? I think I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think it's in the spirit of the system. It's not an inherently evil system that's trying to destroy the environment. It's got a purpose, and we all need to engage with and use it wisely. And I'm all on board with that. It's not just companies that can be naughty with AI.
Totally, yeah. And the planning inspector actually, off the back of that, I noticed that they have their own AI guidance. They brought out guidance in 2024 about the appropriate use of AI in preparing information for submission, and that relates to people submitting appeals, local authorities, members of the public, and it's common sense stuff. It's tell us if you've used AI. Tell us what you used it for. If you've changed a graphic, for maybe completely, helpful purposes, like, if you want to demolish a building, this is how it will change the view. You could maybe use AI to work out that visualization. Tell us, that's not a problem. But if I think the issue here was that they hadn't declared that they'd used this, but it was blatantly obvious, and the inspector said it seems apparent that AI has been used to generate extensive and overly verbose objections. You've wasted the appellant's time. You're going to have to pay that bill.
Yeah, it's right. Oh, it's a funny world, isn't it? It's it's very Wild West everywhere. I'm glad planning's not to the bedlam that's going on.
We'll go try and keep it at bay slightly.
Okay, so what are you got any hot takes or controversial thoughts or predictions for the years to come?
I think AI will start to penetrate planning and development processes. We use it in the office. We use it on a day-to-day basis for a bit of research. I go through kind of phases of using it and then come back to it. Some of my colleagues use it a lot more extensively. I was doing some highways work the other day and was able to put big complex spreadsheet of traffic counts and traffic speeds in and just ask ChatGPT, here's the existing traffic usage levels on this road. Do you think it will result in an inappropriate impact? And it came back with a pretty good response, actually. So, it started to quote planning policy back to me, and it was pretty accurate. So I think because I don't use it consistently every day, being totally upfront, when I do drop in, I'm seeing like an improvement in the quality of the response, which is interesting. It was able to quote back to me the kind of policy test in the National Planning Policy Framework. I think the risk is, and what we've talked about, people spamming the system. You have to constantly check that what you're using it for is accurate and the responses you're getting are accurate. A site that's got a lot of objections that we have in planning just now, the landowner phoned me up. He was concerned at the number of objections and the kind of depth of the objections and the quality of the objections. And he was saying, they're quoting case law and appeals and all this sort of stuff. I was like, take a look. And then when I looked at it, I realized that, a lot of these appeal decisions were hallucinations, AI hallucinations. They did not exist, or they were totally unrelated. So it would say this, a very similar solar farm in Oxfordshire was dismissed at appeal, and then you look up the appeal and it's for a house extension in Barnet or something. We can't. There has to be sort of checks and balances. We can't encourage carte blanche. We can't encourage that approach, carte blanche. There has to be some sort of repercussion, like the member of public in that appeal who had costs awarded against them. But how do we manage, and how do we, police isn't the right word, but how do we ensure we're not just wasting time and officers' time and scarce local authority public resources by wading through mountains and mountains of AI generated stuff? Less is more, but over time the planning system has been asked to take on more and more. As ever with planning, we're keep coming back around to balance as a balance to strike.
Well, be remiss of me not to say, if anyone's having struggles with this, we are here to help. I think on an individual basis, it is quite hard because, like, the public, most people, most non-technical users won't know about how do you stop that stuff, like LLM as a judge and evaluations and all the kind of monitoring you do when you build a robust system. But when it comes to the other side and like actually investing in these systems, there's a lot you can do to very quickly like filter and sift through all the noise and ensure that your documents or your produce is factual and it's pretty straightforward technology now. It's not science fiction and I think we'll start to see it get better and better. But like for a lot of energy companies, we have this managed service we call CALM, which is compliance automation for large language models, and it does the monitoring, it does the health checks, and it makes sure that like no sort of pro-Republican right-wing propaganda is leaking into all your applications or your objections because Donald Trump signed some executive order or whatever in secret. But I think there's a long way to go across the industry, and seeing it like that, we're not going to see good adoption for the right reasons until that trust level's built and we get good outcomes across both sides.
Yeah, totally. I mean, trust is a key word. When I did my master's, I actually wrote a dissertation on the role of trust in the planning system, and we talked. The research talks about thin trust and thick trust. So thin trust is like the trust between two people who have a contract. Thick trust is the trust you have with a close friend or your family. It's built on a personal relationship, and in theory is in theory you can't breach a contract, right? You do a business deal with someone and you breach that contract. There are repercussions, but it's not real trust. It's not the trust you have with, saying to your friend, I'll meet you at 10 o'clock at the train station or something. There's no contract there, but you trust they're going to turn up because, you've built up that relationship. And I think, there is an issue of trust with the planning system, especially between people who see unpopular developments being approved, as there is, there are trust issues with large organizations and large public bodies generally. And I think, working on, it kind of comes back to that idea of improving education around planning, raising the profile of planning. It's really interesting that, two of the hottest political topics of our days, tackling climate change and solving the housing crisis, are, front and center news. They are, taking up, vast amounts of planning resource. There are entire companies devoting their time to solving those problems. So, planning it's gone up in profile. Since I've started doing it, it's front page news at times, but has the trust in the system improved over that time? Probably not. And the more we do, the more we develop, the more pressure we put on our land resource, which is a scarce resource, the more those relationships will be called into question, and for AI to kind of jump into that melting pot of of relationships and trust and all the dynamics that are swirling around in there seamlessly is it's an impossible task.
Yeah, it's like one of my family members all of a sudden has gone from like 2-word birthday cards, like these big paragraphs with loads of lovely poetry in it. And I think, I know your game. I know your idea. We've talked a lot about impact of AI and sort of loosely about adoption, but do you think the education of those points is going the right way in the sector?
And in some ways, yes. I mean, I think as professional users of the system are conscious of these debates and these issues, members of the public maybe less so. They just see AI as an opportunity to generate objections quickly and get involved, get their point across. And we've sort of talked about how sometimes a really valid point can be lost in the melee that as of 100 AI generated objections. I think there's a real responsibility for political leaders, business leaders to make it clear that whilst it's a really powerful tool, that comes with a lot of responsibility. For example, we have a site in planning just now, and There's another site nearby which is a lot more contentious, and one of the local councillors who actually leads one of the political parties in that district generated an AI generated objection which focused on the grid connection and whether or not that project was strategically aligned with the government's Clean Power 30 plan, to try and kind of cut the legs off the principle by saying, it's not aligned with CP30, so it shouldn't be granted planning permission. Now, firstly, planning policy is really clear that you don't need to demonstrate that we want to decarbonise the energy sector and that the support and principle is there in policy. But then secondly, he then must have just asked whatever language model he was using to generate it again for our site and just slammed it into our application. So I sort of downloaded it and put it back through ChatGPT. I was like, "What do you think of this objection, ChatGPT?" And it straight away said, "It's not, this makes no sense. It's not your project is clearly aligned with Clean Power 30 for the following reasons." And I took some advice from our grid engineers, and they said, "Yeah, we're fully aligned. There's no issue here." So it's disappointing to see a councillor who, partly within their rights to object to the scheme and take a view, opposite ours, but using AI to generate a factually incorrect objection to try and cut legs off it, and then just copy and paste it to apply to our site as well. That's I don't think that's a great example to be setting.
It's really, I mean, I guess it's working on the global political stage. So, it just makes me think, how far away are we from training these models on rhetoric and debate? Actually, when truth is out the window, it's all goes back to that social charisma piece. But that's a really, I think we're just going to see more and more of this stuff.
I think so, unfortunately, and being aware of it and being clued up and appreciating that it is coming and being professionally critical of everything you read is a key part of the job. I think some we've been told in the past by some planning authorities that we're good to work with because we're always keen to find solutions. We're not too pushy. We're probably pushy at some point. We're frustrated at a delay or whatever it might be. But there are applicants out there who are far pushier. We're very conscious of the impacts our projects can have, the way we work, the resources we're using. So we always try and operate effectively in terms of what we're trying to achieve, but also very conscious of the impacts we have as well.
So look, this has been an amazing chat. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before I let anyone leave, I always ask if people would like to find out more about you, more about Starlight, or if there's anything you'd like to promote or plug, where should we direct them?
Yeah, I mean, the NextEnergy Group, you can find us quite easily online. Starlight itself, starlight-energy.com. We're on LinkedIn. You can find us pretty easily as well, and you can find me on LinkedIn without too much drama as well if you want to reach out. And yeah, all our applications are online. They're on the internet already. If you want to read our planning reports and look at our drawings and plans, they're out there. So it'd be good to hear from anyone that wants to get in touch.
Amazing. Coming to an AI training set near you very soon. But look, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much. And good to do yet another one in Glasgow.
Yeah, it's great to be working with a local company. It's great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you once again for listening to the Hypercube Energy Podcast. As always, if you have any feedback or comments, or you want to get involved, please get in touch. And if you want to find out more about what's happening in data and AI across the energy sector, please join the Beyond Energy community. And I look forward to speaking to you soon.